Your little real estate game ends here. Those words burned themselves into my mind and refused to fade. The voice belonged to my brother-in-law, Chris Irving, who was sitting in the plaintiff's seat with a triumphant look on his face. He had whispered that poison into my ear just minutes ago. Right before the hearing began, he entered the courtroom with his family in tow and passed by me, just for a fleeting instant. Before I could even respond, the bailiff announced the opening of the court, and Judge Brown entered. It was an insult delivered with perfectly calculated timing. Beside Chris, my biological sister Nicole wore a satisfied smile. In the gallery, our parents nodded stiffly, as if asserting what they believed to be their daughter's rightful claim. The trial was unfolding in their favor exactly as they intended. His lawyer was presenting a carefully fabricated story of lies. Ms. Tracy Manning has long exhibited extreme emotional fluctuations. She alternates between periods of rational clarity and periods of impulsive instability. The lawyer continued in a voice heavy with feigned sympathy. This contract was signed during one of her rational phases. At the time, she stated, "This is a vacation home for the whole family," and signed of her own free will. However, recently she has entered another unstable phase and is now attempting to renege on this legitimate promise in order to monopolize a valuable asset. It was flawless logical armor. Because I was unstable, I needed a guardian. But because the contract was signed when I was rational, it was valid. They dismissed the blood, sweat, and tears of my 8 years of work as nothing more than the impulsive purchase of a fickle woman. Worse, they were trying to redefine even my sanity in whatever way suited them. Chris looked at me, the corner of his lips twisting into a smirk. His eyes said it clearly. "We're the ones who write the story of your life." This is what they called everything I had built. Tracy's little real estate game. I simply sat there in silence, watching their farce unfold. Judge Brown lowered her gaze to the contract that had been submitted. Her eyes stopped dead on the section listing the property details. A brief silence fell. Then the judge slowly raised her head and looked straight at me. "Ms. Manning, this is one of the 12 properties in your real estate portfolio, correct? How very interesting. I would very much like to review the rest of your holdings as well." The air in the courtroom froze. Chris's smile stiffened. I quietly watched as the color drained from Nicole's face, and from our parents as well. A heavy silence descended over the courtroom. Moments ago, their lawyer had been overflowing with confidence. Now it felt like a lie from another world. Chris's ugly grin remained plastered to his face, frozen in place. Nicole stared back and forth between the judge and me, disbelief written all over her face. And our parents? They could only gape, mouths hanging open, unable to comprehend the reality before them. They had truly believed in the image they themselves had created, the illusion of a pitiful, incompetent Tracy. They believed I was recklessly burning through money, standing on the brink of ruin, exactly as that illusion dictated. That was why it never even crossed their minds that the words, 12 property real estate portfolio, would come from a judge's mouth. A memory from 8 years ago stabbed into my mind like a knife. In my parents' living room, filled with expensive furniture, my father's voice rang out. "We've decided to stop paying your college tuition after this term. Nicole's wedding is expensive, and honestly, investing in you any further would be a waste." My mother followed without hesitation. "That's right, Tracy. You have no talent. You should find someone suitable as soon as possible and settle down." At that moment, I understood. In this household, I was the first to be discarded. My dreams and efforts held no value compared to my sister's wedding decorations or my parents' social image. At the bottom of that cold despair, I made a quiet vow. I would rely on no one. I would let no one decide my worth. Absolute financial power would be my armor and my sword. That was when my little real estate game began. But it was never a game. It was a lonely, brutal fight. Studying economics and law on my own, living in libraries, juggling multiple part-time jobs, forcing my way forward like carving a path through the wilderness. While they mocked me, I bought my first small apartment and saved for the down payment on the next. My battle continued quietly, unnoticed by anyone, but steadily, without fail. I pulled my consciousness back from those memories to the present courtroom. Beside me, my lawyer, Mr. Johnson, gave me a small, composed nod. It was time to strike back. Mr. Johnson rose slowly to his feet. Unlike my flustered family, his movements were calm, filled with unshakable confidence. From a massive briefcase, he produced a thick stack of meticulously organized files. That alone made the single forged contract they had submitted look utterly insignificant. Judge Brown, I would like to explain the asset portfolio of my client, Ms. Tracy Manning. Mr. Johnson's voice rang out clearly, reaching every corner of the courtroom. First, the initial property that was purchased 8 years ago, a studio apartment in the Old Town district. The down payment was saved entirely by Ms. Manning through working multiple jobs simultaneously. I glanced toward my father in the gallery. Confusion and panic were written all over his face. His words from 8 years ago echoed sharply in my ears, the day I first told him my plan. Real estate? Tracy, that's not work for a woman like you. It's a dirty man's world. You'll be taken advantage of and chewed up in no time. Drop it. My father had dismissed my resolve as nothing more than a foolish, rebellious phase. Johnson continued, his tone steady and matter-of-fact. The second property was acquired 14 months later, a small office building in the downtown commercial district. It was purchased using rental income from the first property, combined with further savings accumulated by Ms. Manning herself. The third property. With each property Johnson listed, the color drained from Chris and Nicole's faces. Inside their heads, they were surely calculating in desperation. Just how much wealth Tracy, the woman they had sneered at as a pathetic single woman, had quietly built, and when their entire plan was beginning to collapse at its foundation. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. This was no longer a simple family dispute. The existence of a vast asset empire was about to be revealed publicly in the courtroom for the first time. And the fourth property? Johnson paused briefly and turned the page. I could almost feel that split second of silence tightening around their hearts. He continued on to the fifth, then the sixth property, reading through the list of assets I had acquired. Each one was, to me, a record of battles carved out with blood and sweat. When the address of the sixth apartment building was read aloud, I instinctively closed my eyes. That property. Shortly after purchase, a severe structural defect, one not mentioned in the inspection report, came to light. The repair costs far exceeded the original budget, rapidly draining my available cash. The bank coldly refused additional financing, and for the first time in my life, the word bankruptcy became frighteningly real. Those 2 months were hell. 1 slice of bread and coffee per day. At best, 3 hours of sleep a night. I had nightmares every day. Unable to ask anyone for help, I fought alone, groping forward through a dark tunnel, completely isolated. But that despair made me stronger. I ran to the library, devouring textbooks on building codes and structural mechanics. I gathered estimates from multiple contractors, negotiated personally, rebuilt the repair plan, and ultimately succeeded in cutting costs by 30%. That experience transformed me from a mere investor into a businesswoman capable of overcoming any adversity. Today, the very property Johnson was describing is one of the highest-yielding assets in my entire portfolio. The symbol of my despair had become, ironically, a powerful weapon. One now shattering my family's last remaining hopes. I slowly opened my eyes and looked at my sister, Nicole. Her lips trembled as if she had seen a ghost, her hand clutching her husband, Chris's arm. But Chris no longer had the composure to support her. He was simply glaring at his own lawyer, with eyes that clearly said useless. As Johnson moved on to the 7th and 8th properties, a murmur rippled through the gallery. The bailiffs and other lawyers, who had likely dismissed this as nothing more than a strange family property dispute, were visibly stirred. No surprise there. What was being revealed was not merely a personal asset list. It was the portfolio of a single invisible power player who had quietly, yet decisively shaped the city's real estate market. I did not look away from my parents. My mother, Susan, no longer had the composure to play the tragic heroine. She could only clutch her handkerchief tightly. My father, Richard, had moved from confusion to anger and now to something else entirely: humiliation. For him, the realization that his daughter had achieved success far beyond him, entirely without his knowledge, must have shattered his pride at its core. When I still lived at home, whenever relatives gathered on holidays, my father always introduced me the same way. "This is my eldest daughter, Tracy. Plain girl, no particular talent, but she's kind." That was not affection. It was a curse, defining my value as harmless but incompetent, a way to keep me under his control. Whenever Nicole brought home her wealthy husband, Chris, my father would say to me, "Learn from Nicole. A woman's happiness comes from finding a good man." My success destroys every curse they ever placed on me. My very existence is a complete rejection of their values. That is why, in their world, I had to be poor and unhappy, so their small, fragile universe could remain intact. The sound of Johnson turning a page echoed through the quiet courtroom. "Ninth property." His voice sounded like the opening gong of my revenge against the past. "And the 10th property. Downtown District, 15 Riverside Avenue. Commercial building, commonly known as the Phoenix Lofts." The moment Johnson spoke that name, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted once again. This was not the same restless murmuring as before. It was a silent shock, laced with awe. I saw several journalists in the gallery hurriedly begin taking notes. The Phoenix Lofts. That name is known to anyone involved in business in this city. Once dismissed as a derelict brick building so dangerous it was called a breeding ground for crime, it was an eyesore even the city itself had given up on. Then, several years ago, an anonymous investor purchased that ugly structure and brought it spectacularly back to life. A miracle redevelopment project. Today, it stands as a landmark of the area, housing some of the city's most fashionable restaurants, art galleries, and high-tech company offices. That project was the greatest gamble of my life. I poured nearly 80% of my entire net worth into it and endured countless sleepless nights. But I will never forget the emotion of the night the first tenant's lights came on in the completed building. That was the moment my solitary battle was recognized publicly for the first time. Newspapers and magazines praised, anonymously of course, the brilliance of the genius investor T. Manning. That success gave me unshakable confidence and wings to aim even higher. I looked at Chris. His face had gone beyond pale. It was ashen. The impossible-to-book French restaurant he bragged about using for dates sat on the top floor of the Phoenix Lofts. Nicole must have realized it too. Her favorite boutique was on the building's ground floor. The dazzling world they had enjoyed merely as consumers, the very pinnacle of it, was owned by Tracy, the woman they had looked down on and tried to destroy. That cruel truth was blasting straight through their minds. Judge Brown narrowed her eyes behind her glasses. "The Phoenix Lofts? I see." That single murmur made it clear. Every scattered dot had just connected. Judge Brown raised a hand to stop Johnson. She had clearly decided there was no need to read any further down the list. She turned a severe gaze toward Chris, Nicole, and their lawyer. "Counsel, moments ago you claimed that Ms. Tracy Manning, your client's sister-in-law, lacks judgment and engages in reckless spending. However, the facts revealed here tell a very different story. Ms. Manning owns and operates the Phoenix Lofts, one of the most successful redevelopment projects in this city, and holds at least 9 additional income-producing properties. How do you intend to explain the fatal discrepancy between your claim and these facts?" The judge's voice was calm, but it cut like steel. Chris's lawyer broke into a cold sweat, stammering uselessly as he tried to form an excuse, but no words would come together. Then Johnson delivered the decisive blow. "Your Honor, there is one more important property." He produced the final file. "The 12th property. The Grand Majestic Theater, a structure officially designated as a city historical landmark." The courtroom's shock reached its peak. That beautiful theater, beloved by everyone in the city, closed on the brink of demolition, saved and reborn as a cultural sanctuary by an anonymous patron. Surely not. Ms. Manning personally funded the restoration of this theater, Johnson continued, and in recognition of her contribution, she has received an official commendation from the City Historical Preservation Society. He submitted a copy of the award certificate as evidence. Your Honor, I ask you this. Is it conceivable that someone prone to emotional instability and impulsive waste could carry out a project requiring such long-term vision, meticulous planning, and, above all, deep love for the community's cultural heritage? The answer was obvious to everyone. The fabricated image of a mentally unstable Tracy collapsed without a trace under the weight of undeniable evidence. I simply watched in silence. My 8 years of solitary struggle were speaking more eloquently than words ever could, proving my truth in this courtroom. Now then, Your Honor? Johnson's tone sharpened. There can no longer be any doubt that Ms. Tracy Manning is an exceptionally capable individual who has also made significant contributions to society. That raises a critical question. Why would the plaintiffs, her own family, bring such blatantly false claims? He paused, then addressed the entire courtroom. Their goal was to strip Ms. Manning of control over her assets. But if she owns 12 properties, why were they so obsessively fixated on just one? This mountain vacation home. For the first time, the memory of that detestable phone call, the origin of this entire ordeal, returned as a blade of counterattack. Johnson held a single document high. This is an article from a luxury lifestyle magazine's website. 6 weeks ago, this very vacation home was featured as one of the most noteworthy hidden luxury retreats of the moment. The owner's name was withheld, and the very next day after the article was published, Ms. Nicole Irving, the defendant's sister, placed a phone call to Ms. Manning. Nicole's syrupy voice echoed in my mind. Hey, Tracy, I heard you bought an amazing vacation house. Isn't that wonderful? But you're single and don't even have kids. What's the point of keeping it all to yourself? That's something a family like ours with children should be using? That was not a suggestion. It was the first declaration of ownership. During that call, Ms. Irving unilaterally asserted that the vacation home belonged to her family. His words gave voice to my own thoughts. Ms. Manning, of course, refused. And just 3 weeks later, this absurd lawsuit was filed, armed with a forged contract and malicious lies. Every piece fell into place. This was never about concern over asset management capacity. They saw the luxurious vacation home in a magazine, realized it belonged to the sister they had always looked down on, and driven by jealousy and greed, they tried to take it by force. That was all. That simple, ugly motive was laid bare under the bright lights of the courtroom. At last, Chris finally screamed as if he could no longer bear it. Lie. It's all a lie. There's a contract. Tracy, signed it. His disgraceful scream echoed through the once quiet courtroom. But no one believed him anymore. Judge Brown silenced him with an icy glare. Mr. Irving, regarding the contract you submitted? She slowly picked up the document. There are several very interesting points. Right on cue, Johnson spoke up. Your Honor, we commissioned a professional handwriting analysis of that contract, as well as a materials analysis of the paper and ink used in its creation. We submit the expert reports as evidence. Johnson handed another thick file to the bailiff. According to the findings, first, the signature is a crude forgery that does not match Ms. Tracy Manning's handwriting with a probability of 98.7%. Nicole let out a short, sharp gasp. Chris glared at her, his face twisted with rage. It was obvious who had forged the signature. Johnson continued mercilessly. More importantly, the paper and ink. Analysis shows that the ink used in this contract is a newly released product that went on the market just 3 months ago. The date written on the contract, however, is 1 year ago. Now then, how should we interpret that? Do the plaintiffs happen to own a time machine? A ripple of suppressed laughter spread through the gallery. This was no longer even a farce. It was simply the pathetic unraveling of a foolish criminal scheme. Forgery had now been proven, scientifically and decisively. The lawyer representing Chris and Nicole covered his face in despair. He had likely been deceived by his own clients. In that moment, his professional career took a devastating blow. I watched silently as everything collapsed around them. This was the inevitable consequence for those who try to steal what belongs to others by force. Chris and Nicole were deathly pale, unable to utter a single word. In the gallery, our parents trembled as they were forced to confront the reality that their son-in-law and daughter were criminals who had committed blatant fraud in a court of law. The social standing and pride they had tried so desperately to protect shattered into pieces in that very moment. Judge Brown slowly reviewed the forensic reports, then placed the documents on her desk and turned toward me. Her expression softened, still firm, but now layered with something human, something complex. Ms. Manning, first I wish to apologize for forcing you to waste your valuable time on such a baseless claim. It was an extraordinary statement, a judge apologizing to one party in a case. And, she continued, if you are willing, I would like to hear directly from you. What you have thought, and what you have accomplished over these past 8 years, and why your family knew nothing of this remarkable success. All the evidence was in. The legal victory was already assured. This was the final stage the judge had given me, not as a mere victim, but as the protagonist of this story, allowed to speak the truth in my own words. I rose slowly to my feet. Beside me, Mr. Johnson gave a firm, encouraging nod. I took a deep breath. Then, one by one, I looked at the faces of the family who had betrayed me, belittled me, and tried to take everything from me. It was time to bring this farce to an end, with my own words. I first acknowledged Judge Brown politely. Thank you for your consideration, Your Honor. Then I turned toward the witness stand and began speaking, to my family and to everyone in the courtroom. My voice did not shake. 8 years of solitary struggle had given me unshakable strength. The reason I never told my family anything is simple, because they did not want me to succeed. I saw my father and mother flinch. 8 years ago, I told my father I wanted to start investing in real estate. He said, "You have no talent. You'll be taken advantage of and fail." My mother said, "A woman's happiness comes from finding a good man." Instead of believing in my potential, they forced the role of incompetent daughter onto me, because that was more convenient for them. When I bought my first small apartment, my sister Nicole laughed and said, "Who would ever rent a place that old and dirty?" Her husband, Chris Irving, called me a pathetic single woman and looked down on me while I worked myself to the bone. I paused and looked at them, one by one. Not a single person could meet my gaze. They wanted me to fail. Somewhere deep down, they expected me to be poor, miserable, and eventually come crawling back to them. Because my success would prove that everything they believed, the values they forced onto me, was wrong. They couldn't accept that reality. So when they learned of my success, their response wasn't celebration. It wasn't about recognizing or showing respect to my empire. It was to steal it and to destroy it. My words were quiet, yet carried the full weight of truth as they resonated throughout the courtroom. The forged contract they submitted, I continued. That document was not merely a tool of fraud. It was the embodiment of their desire. The ugly wish that I would be exactly as they said. Foolish, reckless, and incapable of accomplishing anything without their help. I turned to the judge. Judge Brown, regarding their claims about my so-called mental instability, I have something to say. Yes, I may have been unstable at times. For 8 years, I walked this path alone, misunderstood by everyone, enduring ridicule from my own family while building an empire from nothing. There were countless nights when I felt my heart might break. But I strengthened my voice. Not a single one of my decisions was made on impulse or whim. Each of the 12 properties was acquired through meticulous calculation, careful strategy, and above all, an unshakable determination to carve out my life with my own hands. Redeveloping the Phoenix Lofts and restoring the Grand Majestic Theater were not acts of chance. They were investments, in this city and in myself. Finally, I looked straight at my sister, Nicole. She was crying, but whether those tears came from regret or frustration over her failed scheme no longer mattered to me. What they wanted was a single $1.5 million vacation home. What I was protecting was my life over the past 8 years. These 12 properties? No, the empire I built myself. When I finished, the courtroom was utterly still. Only the echo of my words lingered in the air. After a long, heavy silence, Judge Brown finally spoke. Her voice no longer sounded merely judicial. It carried the solemn resonance of human dignity itself. Ms. Tracy Manning, thank you for your courageous testimony. She then directed her gaze to the plaintiff's bench. No, now the defendants, Chris and Nicole. Her eyes held no sympathy, only the stern light of justice. Ms. Nicole Irving, Mr. Chris Irving, your actions go far beyond a simple family dispute. You knowingly used forged documents and filed malicious false claims to deceive this court, attempting to unlawfully seize another person's property and destroy her reputation. This is an egregious act of fraud. She pronounced each word deliberately, as if carving them into stone. Accordingly, this petition is dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, I declare that the allegations of perjury and fraud in this case will be formally referred to the prosecutorial authorities. A sharp clatter rang out. At the spot where Chris had been standing, his lawyer's briefcase fell to the floor. Chris himself barely managed to keep from collapsing. Nicole let out a broken sob. Then Judge Brown's piercing gaze swept to my parents in the gallery. Mr. Richard Manning, Ms. Susan Manning. You did not take the stand, yet throughout this charade you nodded in approval, and even applauded, thereby clearly endorsing the plaintiff's fraudulent actions. Such behavior is an insult to this court and amounts to admitting complicity in this malicious scheme. Your responsibility will also be pursued by Ms. Manning's counsel, in civil court. My parents froze as if struck by lightning. The excuse that they had just been sitting there no longer held. Their ruin had been sealed. Following my testimony, Judge Brown's rulings marked the beginning of the end for them all. First, Chris, the ringleader. He was sentenced to prison for perjury and fraud and was immediately taken into custody. The man who had laughed arrogantly in court was dragged away by the bailiff, unable even to resist. His pitiful retreat was a spectacle in itself. His career, pride, and affluent lifestyle all ended in that courtroom. My sister Nicole received a guilty verdict with a suspended sentence. Though spared from prison, the punishment was equivalent to a death sentence in her world. Her social circle, which she valued more than life itself, effectively exiled her. Friends turned their backs, party invitations stopped coming. Her husband was in prison, her proud mansion confiscated, and the role she had desperately played, wealthy, happy wife, was forcibly stripped from her in the most humiliating way. As for my parents, they lost their civil suit brought by Mr. Johnson, forced to pay substantial damages for complicity in perjury. But that was not all. Every past slight, every derogatory remark they had hurled at me was made public, and local media branded them as toxic parents who envied their daughter's success and sought to destroy her. The social standing they clung to so desperately crumbled, their long-standing high-end furniture business saw customers disappear, and they quietly descended into ruin. Haunted by regret and internal strife, they would spend their remaining days hurling blame at each other, a prison of their own making. I obtained permanent restraining orders against all of them, and my 12 properties were placed under ironclad trust management. From now on, they have no legal way to interfere in my life. They merely reaped the consequences of the greed and envy they sowed themselves. There is no place for them in my world anymore. My future begins now, from the 12 fortresses I have fought to protect.